everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We at STP truly hope you all are doing well and taking care of yourself and staying safe. With that said, welcome to our today's episode of the STP Training Webinar Series. The title for our talk today is Speed Dating in the Tool Pool. Our guest speaker joining us on the webinar is Darrel Farris. I'm Smita Mishra. I'm a tester myself and a sustainability enthusiast too. And I'm excited today to host you all and Darrel on our STP webinars. Before we get started with the webinar, let me quickly share an important update that may interest you. There is an upcoming webinar, Principles to Guide Testing, Modern and Agile, on the 20th of May this year. The speaker is Lisa Crispin, who's the co-founder at Agile Testing Fellowship and Observability Practitioner at OutSystems. In this webinar, Lisa is going to talk about two sets of principles, which are 10 principles for Agile testers, introduced by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory, and the modern testing principles formulated by Ellen Page and Brent Jensen very recently. She'll be talking about how they relate to each other, how teams can benefit from them, and how they might shape the future of testing and quality. Sounds like an interesting webinar to me, and the link is up for you to register. Please do go for it. Also, we are inviting proposals for webinars from all of you, and this is open all year round. So if you can submit anytime you're ready. And if you would like to speak at STP webinars to send in your proposals, all the details along with the submission form are at the link given on the screen. Please do go through them. In case you have recommendations on topics or speakers, do email them to us. We'll be happy to hear from you. If you are on Twitter, please share the webinar details and call for papers information about the same with your followers and connections. You can add STP's Twitter handle to your tweets, which is @SoftwareTestPro. Please do add the hashtag STP webinar to your tweets, and you can also note down Darrel's Twitter handle, which is shown on the screen. All right, let's get started with the webinar today. Welcome, Darrel. We are very excited to have you with us today, and let me quickly introduce you for all of us here. Darrel Farris is a solution architect at Mabel, a venture-backed startup that is making intelligent end-to-end testing easier. Prior to Mabel, Darrel spent much of his career working across a variety of roles within product delivery, often focused on aspects of quality and testing. His diverse technical experience and upbeat personality makes him an engaging, compelling coach with a focus on nurturing good testing practices. In his free time, Darrel enjoys papercraft, tinkering with the insights of pianos, photography, and niche fragrances. All right, now let's get started with speed dating in the tool pool. Darrel, the floor is all yours now.
Thank you so much, Smita. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you are. And thank you for tuning into this webinar. I'm really excited to talk to you about tooling and how to find some tools that match your needs and can make your work a better place. As Smita said, my name is Darrel Farris. I work for Mabel, which is an intelligent testing platform. You can check us out at mabel.com. I encourage you to follow me on Twitter or add me on LinkedIn. I love talking about testing and teams and all of the things around them, so please reach out. Today's talk is really about finding ways to make our workdays better through better tooling, the things that help us facilitate our jobs. And I think there's a lot happening in tech. There always is a lot of things happening in tech. It's a never-ending change fest. But I think sometimes we need to maybe take a step back and think about the relationships that we have with our tools and the way we carry out our work every day. I think a lot of us have been in bad relationships, or maybe not the perfect ones. And I often say that we typically spend more time at work every day than we often spend with our significant others. So I think that that time should be quality, and I think that the tools and the various mechanisms that we use to carry out our work have a really direct impact on that satisfaction. So for example, for me as a tester, over the years, I have, certainly realized that, my automation framework that I once loved maybe wasn't meeting my needs anymore, right? I think a lot of people, can identify with these two. A lot's changed since many of the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis, might have been either created or just brought on into our organizations. Especially as teams are shifting to methodologies like Agile, we have to test iteratively in these shorter cycles and big bursts. Whereas, in the old days of waterfall, we had months to plan our testing and, weeks or months or, with compressed schedules, sometimes days to, actually execute that testing. But a lot's changing right now. And I think that, especially in this age of DevOps, the big challenge is keeping pace with development, right? Again, it's the testing in iterative cycles and, being able to do your exploratory testing while finishing all of your automated testing and getting feedback on UX. I think there's a lot that's asked of testers now, and it's a good thing, but we have to adjust some other things to make it all flow nicely, I believe. So what if something is better out there than what we have right now? Is it time to move on? I think some people that I've spoken with through the course of my job, which may be to back up, I work with teams when they're thinking about using Mabel to either augment or displace their current approach to automation. So I get to hear about and learn from this kind of direct pain that users are facing with their current tooling and help them decide whether or not Mabel is the right choice for them. And so I think that process, though, is can be abstracted to be made somewhat more general. And again, it's all about, what are the problems you're facing now, and is there something better out there? But a lot of people don't really know that there are new things out there, or maybe they know, but they have some pushback in their organizations to, not rock the boat per se. Change is scary, right? But don't panic, because I think that there are some things that we all can do to modernize our approach, because, I think that right now we're in this kind of golden age of testing, right? There's hope. But let's reflect on this for just a second, because I think this is really the core tenet of where I'm coming from in this presentation. Because I really do believe that we spend a lot of time at work, and even when we're not at work, we're often thinking about work. And so I believe the things that we do at work have a direct impact on just our personal sense of satisfaction and maybe even happiness, for a loftier term, at the end of the day when we leave. So to kind of frame this with a little bit of data, this is a survey that we did at Mabel. Each year we do this kind of state of testing, state of DevOps type survey, where we send out a survey to a bunch of people and we get a lot of data back. And these are some of the key points that I found really, really interesting. Only 36% of people agree that their current testing tools are keeping pace with development. That's pretty scary. But you see 72% of people are looking for new tools. Feel free to look at all of these numbers, but the last one I think is the most impactful to me, where only half of the people believe that their tool set is supporting their architecture. As a tester, right, that's sort of like, what are we doing? So I think that this kind of paints a picture that it's a good time for change, right? There is a lot of things happening out there. So think about your relationship with the things that you're working with, and maybe are there warning signs? Are there clues that maybe it's time to change a little bit? Just like in human relationships, maybe you spend a lot of time together, but it's not really quality time. Or maybe you have different ideas about the future, right? Maybe you're using a tool that was, conceived in the waterfall days and is just structured to work in that paradigm, and shoehorning it into an agile sort of paradigm just doesn't really work. Sometimes it's a struggle to do simple things together. I can tell you how many times, I've had to try to, click an element 3 different ways to make it work cross-browser. It shouldn't be that hard, right? Too high maintenance. You hear this a lot in human relationships, right? In the breakup speech. But I think this has a lot of impact on our tooling, and of course, not only testing tools, but a lot of them. Some things require just a lot of touch points and a lot of maintenance, and sometimes we just don't have time. When I say your friends aren't supportive of the relationship, thinking about this in a work paradigm, it really means your team. I think sometimes, maybe I see, there's a champion of a certain tool or a certain product that they're using, but, everyone else on the team just, kind of talks in hushed voices about how terrible it is. I really think for the magic to happen with this, the whole team needs to be bought in. And sometimes, things are just complicated. Sometimes there are political reasons that certain tools are in place and whatnot. And maybe that's a little harder to go against. But in the rest of this presentation, I'm going to show you maybe some ways that you can not only think about a technical case of why you should look at different tools or consider it, but maybe there's a business case also. And thinking about this again and sort of testing and Agile, right? I think the whole goal of testing is to really just, test as much, test frequently. You see we have these cycles here where, we do our testing before we deploy, maybe things like unit tests and whatnot. We deploy something, we're running tests, we deploy again to a different environment. We want to test in production. It all sounds fine until it scales. And you might have 1,500 scenarios. I work with folks who have tens of thousands of tests that they run. You're thinking about 3 client targets, maybe that's Safari, Chrome, and Firefox, and you have to do it 3 times a day. Now, I don't know about your teams, but my company typically releases to production more frequently than 3 times a day. So, we have to test this stuff a lot. And I think what happens is often we end up seeing this. And, that's this, rash of commits or PRs piling up, waiting for feedback, because testing just can't happen fast enough. And I think even in the waterfall days, we always heard things like testing is the bottleneck. And I think that, maybe wasn't really the right spirit of that back then, but I think now it's a really acute problem, because in DevOps we can, have these faster release cycles in theory, but we also have to have faster testing and more testing to give us confidence to really do that. So I think testing still is a bottleneck, but it's for different reasons now. And some of the ways that I think, some of the new tools coming to market that's so exciting are, things that are adding sort of intelligence into our deployment pipelines, right? So yes, we want to know, did the test pass or fail, but what were the errors? Why did the test fail? What changed? Was there a particular commit or PR that triggered this change? Is it happening across other environments? Do I have to check that myself, or can possibly my tools surface that information and make it a bit easier to get, more efficient? Do we have effective coverage? I think things like code coverage are really great tools and great topics to talk about. I think code coverage is easier to perceive in a unit testing paradigm, but when you're thinking about front-end automation, it becomes a little unclear. And so are there features that tools can bring to us that maybe illuminate that side of things a bit more for us as testers and product owners? Have we reviewed changes? Are there different types of gates that we should be doing as part of our release processes that maybe we're not? And can tools fill those gaps for us? Is performance good? Again, these are things that are going beyond pass fail, which is I think where a lot of our tools have left us. And how risky are the changes, right? I hear this from so many people. They want to know from their tools, what's their risk level? Or on the other side, what's their confidence level in their releases? Can they release without worrying that they're going to ruin their customer experiences on the other end of that. Effective test automation is integral to DevOps. One of the things one of our founders, Dan Belcher, said early on after I joined Maple that's really stuck with me, and I think he might have heard it from someone else too, was, what's the biggest thing in DevOps? It's testing. And what's the most important thing in testing right now? It's DevOps. And DevOps, is making us able to push code faster. But along with that, testing really has to be faster and it has to be easier. But as I said before, I believe we're in a golden age of testing. I think there are so many new tools coming on the market right now that are adding all sorts of efficiencies and capabilities that we just didn't have before. And when I say intelligent testing or intelligent pipelines, these are some of the features that I think sort of comprise that notion, right? Things like real user monitoring. What are users actually doing on our websites, and are we testing like that? Augmented exploratory testing, I think all of us agree, probably that manual testing is where the majority of bugs are found. So, but are there ways to sort of augment that and give you tools? Think about, when you put on your augmented reality glasses that we keep hearing so much about, you see metadata about the environment around you. Are there things our tools can do to give us interesting insights or information while we're manually testing? Smarter workflow automation. It should be really easy to set up pipelines and add your testing into pipelines. It has to be. Test results and PRs is another favorite of mine. When we talk about shifting left, it's not just about physically moving testers from a QA org onto cross-functional teams or anything like that. It's about testing earlier in the process. And, for some that was, we're going to test, we're going to have automation against, QA, staging, and production. Well, what about you can do testing before the code is even merged into the code base? Finding those bugs earlier. I think that's what we're all really after, right? But what are you specifically looking for? As you sort of look into these new tools that are on the market that I'm talking about and considering the possibility of maybe there's a better way, these are some of the things that I think are kind of like key points in the process, right? Considering the present is the first one, and that's really about identifying your problems and pain points right now. This is a collaborative process, right? We want to work with our teams. We want to make sure that anyone who's going to be a user of the tools that we bring on is finding benefit from them. They're finding efficiencies in them. They should make your world better, not just different. So have some real talk with your team and kind of get that shared perspective of where things are and where you want them to be. And most importantly, document it, because it's going to come in handy later on. And you want to make sure that you don't repeat the same mistakes in any new things that you bring on that you currently have, right? So again, I like the word pain because I think oftentimes we really feel it. But think about what that relief might be. So if right now your big problem is you just don't have enough resources to do all the testing that you need to do, maybe the tools need to be easier to learn and use. And that will enable more people to contribute to it. So in Mabel, for example, we use a GUI record and playback tool that makes the test creation part a lot easier. That lets folks like product owners and UX folks contribute to creating automated tests as opposed to just developers or just testers or some combination of both. The more the merrier, right? If your pain is that you have failing tests, and then for each failure, you have to go and do 10 or 15 minutes of research and looking at logs and different systems to figure out why the test failed, or worse, you just have to go and manually reproduce every failure because you don't have confidence that your automated tests are really giving you the right insight, that's a good problem to solve too. So think about these things. Think about the challenges. Think about where you're losing time in your day. Think about where the slowdowns are in your process. Think about where you can gain efficiencies. And compatibility is a key to any successful relationship, right? So your team has to buy into them. Everyone who's using this stuff needs to appreciate it and find benefit from it. Think about the future. Think about where your testing really needs to be, a year or 2 years from now. Is your current solution or even your proposed new solution, be honest, is it a stopgap? Do you find something that's better than what you have, but it's still not good enough? I think you should be really open about that with the team, and figure out where those gaps are, and then determine whether those gaps are okay or whether they really need to be filled to kind of give you the functionality and capability that you're looking for. And you have to be willing to get your heart broken. This is all risky. It takes time. I can't tell you how many teams are excited to use Mabel, but they have their sprint work that they have to do, and so sometimes we have to take a second seat in those tools evaluations because they have work to do. So be willing to kind of be flexible with your time there. Don't get disheartened if the first few things you look at just don't meet your needs. Don't think that there's nothing out there that's better. Just keep looking, and but be honest, look before you leap. So you go through this process, you figure out all of your pain points. Now you have to go out there and find your potential match. So play the field a bit. There's a lot of new tools out there, and I think you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your team to do the due diligence and explore them and see whether one is the right fit. Maybe it's a few. You just have to kind of take a look and work with them, and don't just look at bullet points on a product page. Take a demo and maybe even a trial and actually see what the tool feels like to use, because I think that's such an important component beyond just a feature list. Now, how to find these new tools that are out there. If you're watching this webinar, you're already in a good place, because things like conferences are a fantastic place. Now, I know in my career, I didn't really have the luxury to go to many conferences. I think a lot of people don't. But one thing that you can do is look at the exhibitor list on those conferences and see which vendors are there promoting products. Oftentimes new companies use conferences to promote their products. So it's a really great place to look for new things, and even some older ones, right? Because they're trying to keep up too and keep their products fresh and ready for the market. And I really do believe that once you start looking, you're going to find all sorts of things out there, not only in vendor solutions, but open source as well. There's really a ton going on. Again, golden age of testing. Don't be afraid of meetups. They really are full of other introverts. They're a really great place to hear not only how other folks approach their work, but what challenges they're facing too. And I think that there's a lot of shared experience in the community that we work within, and I think the more bridges you can build across that, not only the better you can kind of learn to tweak the things that you do with your job, but I think that you'll just learn a lot from people's successes and people's failures. And the last point here is really important. Companies pay money to advertise to you. So I know oftentimes when we're Googling things, we sort of tune out the ads instinctively. This is a time you want to pay attention to ads, because a lot of folks, even ones who, aren't doing the conferences and whatnot, they're trying to reach you in other ways. So, don't be afraid to click on ads. They're there to help. So we talked about speed dating in the title, right? So what I mean by that is being efficient when you're evaluating these tools, so you can, A, see more, but B, get to a decision a little bit faster. So to facilitate that, I think you have to be really clear about what your success criteria looks like. What are the features, what are the capabilities that you really need to satisfy the needs of your product? So pre-plan what success looks like, but be open that when you get there, it may look a bit different, right? Because these are new tools. Some of them bring in completely new paradigms, right? We're in the age of machine learning, and artificial intelligence, is kind of becoming more of a force too. And those are newer technologies that we may not have the correct perceptions of. So be open. And when you do start using these different tools, push yourself and push the tool. Give it time, give it dedication, and really give it a shot to see if it can do what you need it to do. And I think you also have to be really clear about what it cannot do. Again, it's about identifying those gaps and determining whether or not they're okay or not. Sometimes they are. And definitely keep score. Now, it might not be the best advice in a human relationship, but in this case, I think you do want to keep score. So one thing that I like when I see customers do who are coming to Mabel is that they, have these checklists or scorecards where they might be comparing us against some other products, and they've got their success criteria kind of mentioned out. And then, they'll give us ratings. Maybe one product does it better than the other, vice versa. Maybe the feature doesn't even exist in a different product. Keep track of that. It's good data. It's also good data to keep historically, because people are updating their products all the time. And when you give them feedback, maybe one day you'll see the feature that you really wanted, and might have to reconsider taking another look at that particular solution. So in a typical vendor-based sales process, there's a phase called either a proof of concept or proof of value. I think of that like, your first few dates. It's a process where you'll get access to the tool, you'll get access to support resources. In Mabel's case, we do training sessions to really help you kind of get used to the paradigm we're working within. But the goal of it is to essentially see if the product's a good fit for your team. So I think this is one of those things where, maybe you're not, the most comfortable working, through a sales process or whatnot, but you might be surprised. They're typically pretty rich processes. I think a lot of people put a lot of effort into them. But this is the phase where I think you really have to have all of your success criteria and all of these things kind of locked down and know what it is that you're looking for, because this is when I think the conversation becomes much more real and much more visceral. And salespeople are your friends. I think there's, and I'm guilty of this myself, we're, as engineers, we might say, sales and marketing, this is a time when they really are trying to be your friends, because think about it, right? You're not just buying into a tool, you're buying into a company and a team, particularly with some vendor-based solutions. Some cost a lot of money. So you want to spend that money wisely, right? And on the open source side, you're buying into the community of people who are contributing to a given project. So while a README file and a given GitHub repo, might be super attractive, please look at their commit log and, and see, what's the activity in that particular project. It may have been very popular 6 months ago, but the contribution level could be dwindling, and essentially it's a sign of perhaps a moribund product that you may not want to invest your time into and get your team on board for, because if they stop updating things, it's typically not a good sign for you. But when you're thinking about vendors or open source, think about not only whether the product can meet your needs, but what are the support resources available? Support is one of those things that I find often bring teams to vendors. I joke that it's nice to have someone to point a finger at, but at the same time, there are typically much richer efforts at documentation or video production or these things that can really help hasten the onboarding onto a new tool. Whereas in the open source world, from my experience, sometimes it's, picking one of 1,000 different tutorials on a given topic and hoping that it's the good one. So, there's some differences there. Always remember that licensing and pricing is negotiable, and the sales teams should be helping you in this process. And if they aren't, take that as a sign. But again, think about a partnership with, the sales team that you're working with at vendors, because you're ultimately trying to figure out the same thing, if you're a good match and worth each other's time. And again, the last comment on open source, really look at the community surrounding it, because it's so important in terms of the longevity of your efforts with that given project. And don't be afraid to play the field. Again, this isn't about settling, but it's also not about jumping at the first thing you see. Do your due diligence, keep your process focused and efficient, because you want to be able to try multiple tools. You want to play the field. There's a lot out there. And when you're going through it, I see this all the time. Try not to validate your toughest problem first. Think about it akin to jumping into the deep end of the pool. If you're working with a new tool, start from the basics and work your way up. I see people get so frustrated because they try to do the most complicated thing they can think of as their first effort, and they neglect the fact that they don't know how to use the thing they're trying to use yet. So be conscious of that, and don't set yourself up to be frustrated or disappointed. You may be robbing yourself of an otherwise great experience. But get ready to be disappointed and surprised. Remember, there's no silver bullet with any of these tools, and you have to kind of go into this eyes wide open about what compromises you're willing to make. What are the gaps in your needs versus what these products can offer? And so when you're working with multiple tools and evaluating them, keep your scorecard handy, but think of the sort of less tangible things, right? How long does it take to achieve the same goal in each product? Maybe the process to do that isn't a complete one-to-one equivalent, but you're still, how long does it take to hit the goal? When you're thinking about testing tools in particular, what does that test output look like? I think output is so important, because when your tests fail, this is when your tool really needs to, kind of come into the forefront. It's great to have green things all the time, but work really happens when the tests fail. Why did it fail, etc. How does it feel to use each product? Again, I think feel is so important, because I think it's those intangible things that lead to a sense of enjoyment and accomplishment in our day. And that's ultimately, I think, two really important things that we need to sustain ourselves with our jobs and our work and our teams. Target user personas, this is one that comes up quite a bit too, right? Like Mabel is a low code, no code in some cases tool. Developers initially, might have a reaction where it's like, oh, well, I just want to write code. I don't want to use this simple GUI tool, right? And then they use it for a couple of weeks and they come back and say, oh my gosh, I can spend so much more time writing feature code and application code because it's so much faster to create my test. And really, I don't want to spend my time creating tests. I want to work on my product. So it's an interesting shift. So be open to that, right? That's maybe you're not the target user persona, but maybe that's okay. Are any of these tools actually enjoyable to use, maybe even fun, right? It's about that feel. Do we want to use this tool every day? Or when we sit down and have to use it, do we just kind of sigh and say, oh, I just hope it works this time? That's what we don't want. And if there are any unique features, do they really matter to you? Or is it just a bullet point? So thinking about ROI, it's a big topic. I could probably do a talk on ROI all by itself, but think of it a bit more high level, right? What are your big parts of testing? It's test creation. How long does it take to create a meaningful test? Test maintenance, such a big deal. What's the effort look like in maintaining those tests? Is it easy? Is it cumbersome? Are there tools or features in the tool itself that can help automate some of that maintenance? If so, that's typically a big win. If you look at some of the case studies, both from Mabel and from any other vendor, I think you'll see that test maintenance is where teams spend most of their time. So any efforts at minimizing that, I think typically pay themselves in dividends. Test execution. This is a really big topic right now because I think you could choose to run your test in various places, whether they're on a cloud provider, whether they're locally in something that you orchestrate yourself, with Docker containers or whatnot. What does that infrastructure management look like? Infrastructure maintenance as well. Think about your automation frameworks when you have to worry about compatibility issues between Selenium versions and Chrome driver and Safari driver and IE driver, making sure all of these things match. Certain Java versions might cause different weird errors to happen. Think about that infrastructure side and how it relates to maintenance. And again, the user persona, right? Are the users expensive? Are you bringing on a tool that you need to have someone with an advanced CS degree to use effectively? Or is the tool more inclusive of different skill levels or different roles or functions on a team? How can you bring more people into testing, right? We're trying to break silos down, not create new ones. So what happens if you find the one? So you figured it out, you found the one that makes sense to you, you can't wait to bring it on. So this is, I think, where teams, can sometimes get discouraged because they find the thing and then they realize that, oh, it's actually a big process to bring this on in the company, right? So I think of this part as, just like an old-fashioned courtship. You might have to work with multiple teams within your company. It could, take another few weeks to do this, or even months for security approvals, procurement teams. Now, if you're working with a vendor and a salesperson, they really should have anticipated this part. A good salesperson is going to ask you very early on, what's the process like to bring new tools on? And sometimes that involves getting other people involved in your process outside of your team to start working through those things early, especially things like legal and security. The earlier you can kind of get that ball rolling, the sooner you can start playing with your new friend. But surprise, it doesn't stop there. It's not just about picking a tool and getting it in your company and installed. It's also about rolling it out. And I think that just kind of is about follow through. Implementation can be really tricky. But here are some tips that I've learned from a lot of the companies that I've worked with over the years. And that the number one is just don't rip and replace. That can be traumatic. Think about incremental adoption of different tools. For some that might be, you have an existing solution in place. Maybe all of the new work goes into the new tool and you're just doing maintenance on the old tool and gradually migrating things over. Start with small, meaningful tests wired up to CI/CD to show value. So important, right? Especially if you're moving into a DevOps model or bringing your testing more into a DevOps model. Start small and then build on that. I think it just sets people up for better success in the future. It gives you more opportunity to learn as you go as well and observe. Collaborate with your team, always, always, always on everything. But really specifically to this, you want to get a sense, and you should have a sense by now because you collaborated on the decision-making process, and now you kind of have to collaborate on well, how do we implement and roll this out, and get people or keep people excited about it, make it not a pain. And while you're doing this, make sure to use all of the support and community resources available to you. If that's open source, maybe they have Slack groups or Gitter chats or things like that. Introduce yourself, make yourself known. I find that makes it a little easier to get responses out of people when you yourself show yourself to be a nice person in those realms. but most importantly, you just have to commit to using it. I think sometimes we see, new tools get brought on, everyone's very excited about it, but then the real hard part with change kicks in, and people get a little shy. So commit and follow through. I think it's so important. And again, you're making these decisions for a reason. So when it comes time to really do the hard work, don't be shy. So to kind of wrap up some of the key points here, know the problem you're trying to solve. Now, it may be solved in a different way than you anticipated, but go into it knowing what your pain points. Again, collaborate with your team to figure out what those are. Different perspectives may have different perceptions, and you want to include those in your analysis and evaluation of this particular kind of problem. Always look for opportunities to improve not only the tools and technologies that you're working with, but the processes as well. Again, we're all trying to make work a better place. So think in those terms, and it might be a perspective shift and a good one. Always work with your teams, not only on their needs, but their goals too. I think sometimes the goal part gets lost, especially when you're only talking about pain. Think about what the solution to that pain looks like, because that's really going to help guide your process of finding the right tools. Talk to others, not just your team. Again, if you can find a user community or other customers who are using a particular solution, get some insight from them as well. They might also have tips on, how they rolled out their implementations of these things. We can all learn from one another. And again, this is where things like meetups and online communities and even conferences, I love the conversations that we typically have, and I can't wait to get to questions on this one so we can have some interaction. Don't be afraid to experiment. And really, I think that this sentence reads it all, right? Find something you want to spend your day with. We work so much and so hard. Try to make it fun, but only commit to something when it feels right. But good luck out there, and definitely take advantage of these conferences, especially STP Con. It's such a great one. And the webinar that Smita announced before this, Lisa Crispin's a good friend of mine, and I just really love the whole team approach that she champions. And I think that approach blends quite nicely with some of the things that we talked about in this presentation, right? So I highly suggest you tune into that. I think it's just on the 20th, if I remember correctly, at the same time as this one. And good luck out there. I think there's so many tools, so many new vendors. Go talk to them, ask them questions, learn from them, and enjoy. Welcome to the golden age of testing, everyone. And if you'd like to learn more about Mabel and where I work, try visiting mabel.com. You can also try a free trial of our product, and it is something new. Maybe that'll be just a fun activity to do. And again, please reach out to me. I'm DJB Farris on Twitter, Darrel Farris on LinkedIn. I love interacting with other testers, so don't hesitate to reach out. I look forward to it. But now I think I want to turn on my webcam so all of you can see, and let's get to some questions.
Okay, thank you, Darrel. It was a very insightful session on tools and how to choose the one that fits your needs well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We do have some questions. And by the way, we could actually use this whole presentation as a benchmark for relationship advices too.
It's a lot of parallels.
Yeah, I could see that. All right. So our first question here is, do we need to have coding knowledge to try automation tools?
No, and I think that's one of the really interesting things that's happening right now is this sort of resurgence of low code or no code tools. Even Selenium IDE has sort of risen from the ashes and found new life lately. But Mabel is a low code, no code tool. We have a ton of users who had no automation background and or even had no test automation in their companies whatsoever. And just because of that sort of ease of use component, they're really able to kind of add that in. And I think the side benefit of that too is that, for better or for worse, folks who do test automation are generally perceived as kind of higher value outcomes. I disagree. But the nice thing that happens is when you get these tools that make it easier to bring automation into your company, and especially if you're, coming from a manual only background, or just, not particularly technical, but a great business mind, these tools help you feel like you're contributing, more valuable work. And I think that there's just something intrinsically really satisfying about that to us as individuals. And again, for better or for worse, I still think manual testing is, such a underappreciated skill. But when you can bring automation and manual testing together, I think that's when you get a really solid testing approach.
That makes sense, Darrel. Thank you. Our next question is, how does artificial intelligence factor into this whole process?
Well, I see some tools now that are, sort of looking at things like user logs and whatnot, and figuring out what users are doing, and potentially, baby steps, but automatically creating tests based on that knowledge. Machine learning is another one, sort of looking at, the tons of data that our automated tests generate, and looking for trends and patterns and insights in that data, and kind of, floating things up to us, actionable insights up to us. Again, it's like, how do we go beyond pass fail? And I think some of those tools are really kind of helping that.
Great. Our next question is, what's the best way to understand a vendor's long-term vision and know that they will stick to it?
The knowing when they stick to it part's hard. But I think asking is might seem obvious, but where do you see your company in 3 years is a perfectly fair question. I know when we're doing sales demos at Mabel, we have a few slides that talk about kind of our origin story, talks about our founders and our funding, because we are a startup, and that makes some people feel risky. So we have to essentially convince people that we're here, long term. Something that helps with that is looking at, the customer list of a given vendor. We have a lot of enterprise clients, which I think helps people feel more comfortable. So I think, looking at the sort of, what's the risk profile, or potential for longevity, goes along with that discernment process. But certainly ask where the company thinks that they're going to be in a couple of years. What's their trajectory? What kind of features are they thinking about adding? What's the roadmap look like? Do they have a defined roadmap? That's a good indication that they're thinking into the future. And kind of along those lines, one point that I didn't bring up that I think is a good one is, when you're working with the sales team at a particular vendor, try making a feature request and see what that process is like. Because they should hear you, but they should also kind of give you a sense of where that fits into their roadmap, because again, you're looking to see that they have some sort of vision beyond today. I hope that's a good answer.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. Yeah, so we'll take our last question for the day here. How can I convince my organization that more people should contribute to testing?
There's so many studies. There's so much data, I think, already that you can pull from. Look at case studies. Look at a lot of surveys that are happening industry-wide. I know we have a good one on Mabel that's available that you can, just kind of take a look at. I think from the business side, you often have to think more about the business case. How can this save us money in the long term? Or, how can this lead to increased user satisfaction? I think when you're trying to convince the business, the arguments can sometimes, or the technical arguments become less persuasive. So I think it's good to have insight into both sides, both technical and business, when you're trying to do problem solving of any kind. But yeah, I would look at some of that data, reach out to me, whoever asked that question, reach out to me, and I can send that survey data with you. Maybe that can help. We can have a longer talk about it, because I think it can be a pretty rich process to do that convincing, and I think it's just different per organization, and concerns vary. But I'd love to talk more about that, more deeply.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Darrel, and thank you again for giving us such an insightful session on how to choose a good test tool that fits our needs. I'm sure our attendees found it to be very informative and useful too. I personally enjoyed your presentation and look forward to more, so thank you.
Thank you, Smita, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks to STP Con, thanks to everyone who put the effort in to keep this conference going. I think it's really wonderful to see the resilience and adaptability of everyone kind of right now, and I hope it makes us all feel a bit stronger that the show is going on.
Thank you, Darrel. And
absolutely.
with that, I'm going to well, everyone, this concludes our webinar for today, and thank you for joining, and more importantly, thank you for being engaging and making the most of the webinar for all of us, for yourself and for all of us. Stay tuned for more webinars at softwaretestpro.com. We have an upcoming webinar, which is Principles to Guide Testing, Modern and Agile, on the 20th of May. The speaker is Lisa Crispin, and in this webinar, she's going to talk about 2 sets of principles, which are 10 principles for Agile testers and modern testing principles. So I'm sure if this subject interests you, please do sign up, and again at softwaretestpro.com. And before I leave, let me also remind you, you can submit for speaking at the webinars all year round, and please do send in your proposals as soon as possible at the given link. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again. God bless you, and please stay safe and healthy and practice safe social distancing, and good luck for all you do.